Today, we will learn and reflect on the morality and the history of abortion. Whether you're Catholic or not, the Catholic Catechism has carefully reasoned and well thought out positions on many moral issues confronting the modern believer, including abortion, and thus I believe that any Christian, Catholic or not, should be reluctant to take a moral position contrary to the Catechism. What any truly devout Christian Democrat should also realize is that they are not obligated to totally accept every position in their party platform, including abortion, because the Democratic Party is not a religion. But it is most certainly true that any Christian should evaluate what their position on important political and moral issues are on issues like abortion. This video is my personal attempt to ponder this important moral and medical issue humbly and thoughtfully. And I must admit, my position has evolved as I've become better informed, and we pray that you will seek to become better informed on this issue as well. At the end of our talk, we will discuss the sources used for this video in my blogs that cover the topic. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. Many people have the impression that Christians should be passionate about their beliefs, that they need to shout and attack those whom they see as their spiritual enemies on the various internet forums. They do not want to admit that their adversaries are real, live, emotional, breathing human beings that deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. What is so dangerous about internet memes, those dozen-word exhortations of what you think is truth? Well, internet memes ignore the undeniable fact that life can be complicated and messy, and that often in real-life situations, what's right and what is wrong can be difficult to discern. You show no respect when you judgmentally shout at someone who's forced to make a really difficult life decision, whether this is a difficult pregnancy, a divorce, whether to place parents with dementia in a nursing home. And people in these positions do not need your shouts. They need you to listen and show compassion. Compassion is what shows the world that we are truly Christians. Now, demonizing ladies with problem pregnancies does not help. And there are really some heartbreaking situations involving abortion. Should abortion be allowed if the mother's and or the baby's life is in danger? Should abortion be allowed in case of rape or incest? Should abortion be permitted if it is likely that the mother would otherwise commit suicide? Should abortion be permitted to reduce the number of deaths caused by botched abortions by coat hangers or Lysol? Now, this video is part of our series on the Ten Commandments, using as sources the Catholic and Lutheran catechisms, the Eastern and Western Church Fathers, rabbinic commentators, preachers, scholars, Stoic philosophers, and many other interesting, credible sources. And in this particular issue, I'm going to go ahead and do a summary of my personal beliefs right up front, so everybody knows where I'm coming from. And first of all, I want to emphasize that I agree 100% with Catholic teachings on abortion in the Catechism. The opposite of pro-life is pro-death, not pro-choice. Now, personally, I am uncomfortable with a radical, in all cases, pro-choice position, and the Catholic Catechism is as well. But as a Christian, I am always pro-compassion. That is, compassionate towards the unborn, the born, the mother, the doctors, the poor, the sick, the family, and low-income workers. Pro-life concerns do not end at birth. Pro-life concerns should be from cradle to grave, not just from conception to birth. Our Christian twofold love of God and neighbor means we must be compassionate towards those who face difficult decisions in their lives, even when we feel that they may be considering immoral actions. And above all, abortion is always a personal, moral decision. If the government permits their doctors to make this decision when the mother's and or the children's life is in danger, this does not mean that the government seeks to kill babies. And after studying this topic, I just have to ask, are arguments over Roe v. Wade and abortion pointless anyway? What most people do not realize about the endless debates surrounding abortion is that they are somewhat pointless. The Supreme Court has upheld the provisions of the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment permits the use of federal Medicaid funds to fund abortions only in the case of rape or incest, or when the life of the mother or baby is threatened if they go to term. This decision greatly reduced the number of abortions performed in this country. Most of the court cases on the abortion issue for the past few decades argue the 5% difficult and fringe cases where the parties argue whether the life of the mother or child are truly in danger if the pregnancy goes to term. Roe v. Wade has been effectively neutered by conservative Supreme Court justices already. Also, overturning Roe v. Wade means overturning 50 years of case law. The problems this would cause means that Roe v. Wade is probably a permanent fixture of our legal system. When we recorded this video, the Supreme Court in a narrow ruling on the punitive Texas abortion law that allows private citizens to earn bounties by tormenting abortion providers and people who assist with abortions. Liberal commentators are in a full advocacy mode, which is okay, since the Supreme Court is listening to the controversy this decision is kicking up. But what is lost is that this was a narrow procedural ruling on whether or not the people who appealed to the court had standing to sue. The Texas law was designed to make political points and get great press. It was not designed to be constitutionally viable, and the bounty provisions means that it will likely be overturned. The upcoming Mississippi abortion suit is the suit to watch in the coming months. Supreme Court justices are sensitive to the current political climate. They need a degree of assent from the citizenry, so the legal system will be respected. However, these justices try to go slow when setting precedents in their cases, we hope. In medical issues, they likewise must take into account the ethical and practical concerns of practicing physicians. The responsiveness to the concerns of the legal and medical community means that Roe v. Wade may never be completely overturned. Although Pope Francis affirms the Catholic position on abortion is important, he also warns that abortion rights should not define Catholicism. Pope Francis also warns that you should not be a single-issue voter, but if you insist on being a single-issue voter, that single issue should be social justice, not abortion. The right to life does not end at birth, and abortion is but a small part of social justice. This declaration also warns against hatefully attacking the perceived enemies of the faith on internet forums. As a general rule, before posting anything on the internet, you should ask yourself, does your post increase the twofold love of God between you and your neighbor? And if the answer is no, don't post the hateful comment. And this slide shows many of the links available to credible articles on abortion in both our SlideShare slides and our blog. Now, we do not debate that there are too many girls who are young and foolish and 20 and wanting to party, selfish girls who do not care about their unborn child, foolish girls who do not want the responsibility of motherhood. We agree, and any Christian should agree, that we should do everything we can to encourage these young girls to carry their pregnancy to term. There are 6 sections in the Catechism on abortion. The Catechism was published in 1994, long after the Supreme Court decided the Roe v. Wade case in 1973. Indeed, likely the responses of the American bishops influenced the Catechism's teachings on abortion. Section 2270 of the Catechism states that human life begins and must be respected and protected absolutely from the moment of conception, not from the time of the quickening of the fetus several months into the pregnancy. Both the born and the unborn have the right to life. And Section 2271 reaffirms that this has been the teaching of the Church since ancient times, that we should protect the health of the unborn, exercising utmost care. And then it says in language borrowed from St. Thomas Aquinas, that direct abortion, that is to say, abortion willed either as an end or a means, is gravely contrary to moral law. And Section 2272 again emphasizes this position. Furthermore, it states that abortion is so serious an offense that it risks excommunication. But we want to point out that the Catechism teaches us that we should show compassion, as the Church does not thereby intend to restrict the scope of mercy. Rather, she makes clear the gravity of the crime committed, the irreparable harm done to the innocent who is put to death, as well as to the parents and all of society. And furthermore, formal cooperation in an abortion constitutes a grave offense. And the Church attaches the canonical penalty of excommunication to this crime against human life. And the technical term used here means that this is an excommunication that automatically occurs by the very act of abortion. And this means that the offending mother will not be hauled before an ecclesiastical court downtown to defend herself. This is just a matter between her and Jesus. The Catechism states this: direct abortion, that is, abortion willed either as an ends or a means, is gravely contrary to the moral law. Whenever church teachings in recent centuries refer to people being used as ends or means, it refers to the dignity of the person. In simple terms, we should not use people. We should love our neighbors as ourselves. At the moment of conception, a living person with a soul is formed. And which abortions are not direct abortions? And the U.S. Bishops has on their website a statement on abortion. Of particular importance is the last paragraph of the U.S. Bishops' statement. Given the scientific fact that a human life begins at conception, the only moral norm needed to understand the Church's opposition to abortion is that each and every human life has inherent dignity, and thus must be treated with the respect due to a human person. This is the foundation of the Church's social doctrine, including its teachings on war, the use of capital punishment, euthanasia, health care, poverty, and immigration. Conversely, to claim that some people, born or unborn, should not be treated as persons is to deny the very idea of inherent human rights. We must respect the lives of all vulnerable people, both before and after birth. Now, the bishops do not provide examples of what is considered indirect abortions. Indirect abortions include many of the difficult exceptions we discuss in this video. Exactly which of these exceptions in any specific situation are indirect abortions can be difficult to discern. But as Christians, we should always repent when life has been lost. Note that abortions performed due to rape or incest would be forbidden according to this definition. However, we should be compassionate in these cases and certainly not be judgmental for ladies making this terrible choice. And in the following sections, the Catechism discusses the legal philosophy of abortion. Section 2273 emphasizes that this pro-life stance is both an individual and a political issue. It states that the inalienable rights of the person must be recognized and respected by civil society and the political authority. These human rights to life are part of natural law, and they are inherent in the act by which God creates us. To further emphasize this point, Section 2273 then restates this position in the negative, that when a law deprives anyone of the right of life, then the state is denying the equality of all before the law. When the state does not place its power at the service of the rights of each citizen, and in particular the more vulnerable, the very foundations of a state based on law are undermined. And this is a very strongly held position by the Catholic Church, since it's stated in both the positive and the negative sense. And the Catechism here goes further, stating that the law must provide appropriate penal sanctions for every deliberate violation of the child's rights. Now, many of the technical sections of abortion in the Catholic Catechism are lifted directly from the encyclical Donum Vitae, which was issued by the Catholic Church in 1987. Section 2274 reaffirms that the embryo must be defended in its integrity, cared for, and healed as far as possible, like any other human being. And note that in the context below, the technical meaning of the Catholic word licit is roughly equivalent to permissible. So for the next few sections, we're going to replace licit for permissible. Prenatal diagnosis is morally permissible if it respects the life and integrity of the embryo and the human fetus and is directed toward its health and well-being. The Catechism cautions against the moral hazards of using ultrasounds to determine if an abortion should be induced. The diagnosis of possible mental or physical disabilities that are not life-threatening should not be a death sentence. For emphasis, Section 2275 restates this in a positive manner. One must hold as permissible procedures carried out on the human embryo, which respect the life and integrity of the embryo without undue risk, for its healing and to improve its health and its chances for survival. Furthermore, this section states that it is immoral to produce human embryos intended for exploitation as disposable biological material, and it discourages eugenic procedures that are not primarily therapeutic but rather seek to manipulate the sex or tinker with inherited characteristics. And it says that such manipulations are contrary to the personal dignity of the human being and his integrity and identity, which are unique and unrepeatable. In other words, no super baby mutants are allowed. X-Men? Forget it. Now, it is very doubtful that Planned Parenthood or any other medical office in America produces embryos intended for exploitation as disposable biological material. Now, you may not agree with what they're doing, but for the most part, they are truly trying to help their patients. They are not boogeymen, and they're not traffickers of body parts. So how flexible is the Church? The question I have is, why doesn't the Catholic Catechism include a paragraph that simply says that abortion is permitted when the life of the baby and or the mother is endangered? Now, we do know that it's human nature to take advantage of loopholes when they can. Perhaps the Church does not want to wave a flag about such loopholes, even if they exist. I mean, this is purely a speculation on my part. I really don't know. Now, one thing we can be certain is that anti-abortion activists who shoot doctors at abortion clinics are most certainly murderers and guilty of murder. Another important question that you should ask is, should the state mandate religious morals? And this is really a very legitimate question. And the state does mandate some religious morals, like, how about murder, rape, theft, fraud, and slander? Most modern states forbid such behaviors, with no pushback, and action can be taken in both criminal and civil courts. How about adultery? Most lawyers today have only practiced under the no-fault divorce laws. Nobody in the legal profession ever wants to go back to the days when accusations of adultery were slung back and forth in divorce proceedings. How about drinking? The temperance movement 100 years ago railed about demon alcohol, and mad hoop-skirt women took axes to barrels of liquor. So the Prohibition Constitutional Amendment passed. For 13 years there was no beer, no wine, no liquor, but instead there were gangsters, shootouts, speakeasies, prostitutions, deaths from alcohol poisoning, and people just tired of the chaos and mayhem and longing for legal beer. So another constitutional amendment repealed prohibition, and then came the New Deal. Happy times, we're here again. What about abortion? Should the states allow abortion, or should it be the mother's choice? Regardless, priests and preachers and all Christians should actively discourage abortion. The problem is when you close the abortion clinics, many young pregnant mothers will try to abort on their own. And if they try aborting with a coat hanger or with Lysol, which was and is a common practice, they can die a horrible death. Now, this is just not as much of a problem as it was in decades past. Everyone knows that Dr. Google knows everything, and if the pregnant mother just asks Dr. Google what drug and dosage they should take to abort their baby, Dr. Google will tell them all he knows without a twinge of guilt. And this is much safer than using Lysol and coat hangers, but the question remains, should these ladies take this immense risk on their own with no doctor in sight? It is still highly risky. Certainly, when practical, the state can mandate that young mothers considering abortion receive personal counseling from someone not formally connected to the abortion clinic about the downsides of abortion. But it's funny how we never hear about that. It is certainly highly hypocritical for a Deep South state to ban abortion when their social safety net is shredded and threadbare. If they refuse to expand and integrate Medicare with Obamacare, if they restrict food stamps and nutritional counseling, if they have no child care assistance for working mothers, and if they refuse to mandate a living minimum wage and decent unemployment benefits. Forcing the desperately poor to make draconian decisions because nobody will help them definitely is not compassionate. Another legitimate question is, should the state mandate medical decisions? Now, many people will argue that abortion should only be permitted in those very rare cases where the fetus will not be viable and will live for best a day or two after they are born. Ask any doctor. There are a few incredibly grotesque birth defects that doctors encounter. The ancient sources refer to them as monsters. Most of the time, the body self-aborts these non-viable fetuses. Up to 20% of pregnancies end in miscarriage, and this varies widely from woman to woman. And many doctors suggest abortion for the rare viruses like Zika and rubella that are absolutely devastating to the fetus. And sometimes a mother's life is in danger, sometimes the baby's, and sometimes both their lives are in danger if there's no abortion. Rarely you can predict such mortality with near 100% accuracy. but much more often there is a continuum. The doctor can only predict a high or higher certainty of mortality. Whatever your opinion of Roe v. Wade, an informed opinion is preferable to ignorance, so we will review the history of Roe v. Wade, which was decided in 1973, following the tumultuous 60s, a decade of political and cultural change. The birth control pill had just been invented. Soon 1 of 5 women were on the pill, and this was the decade of Woodstock and free love, and Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, was a bestseller. Many years later, Friedan recalled that many women called her out of the blue after reading her book, telling her, "Your book has changed my whole life. I decided to go back to school. I decided I would be more than a secretary. And I told my husband, you're not the only one around here that counts. I'm a person too. And indeed, each person should have dignity." The Equal Rights Amendment was passed by Congress with an overwhelming majority, but it was never ratified by the necessary number of states, since it was challenged by many evangelical activists. New York surprised the nation by passing a liberal abortion law. State Senator Albert Lewis later revealed why he had voted for the bill. Recently, he had been in the emergency room and watched a 16-year-old daughter of a constituent die from a botched illegal abortion. While she was delirious and dying in her mother's arm, the policemen were badgering her to give up the name of the abortionist. Senator Lewis chased the police from the hospital room so the girl could die in peace. Now that we've discussed the times of Roe v. Wade, let's discuss the Supreme Court decision itself. Jane Roe was a pseudonym to protect the privacy of Norma McCorvey. Norma met 2 young attorneys, Linda Coffey and Sarah Weddington, at an Italian restaurant. They told Norma it was unlikely that her case would be heard in time for her abortion, so she gave up the child for adoption, but agreed to allow them to argue her case. Weddington sympathized. While attending law school, she and her boyfriend had driven to Mexico for a secret abortion. Norma was not exactly a paradigm of virtue. She was already 6 months pregnant. She could not work, so she drank and smoked dope. She had already given up 2 prior children for adoption. She was dead broke and did not feel any attachment to the thing growing inside of her. After giving birth, she drank and became more depressed, swallowing dozens of pills to end it all. After giving birth, she drank and became more depressed, swallowing dozens of pills to end it all. Years later, Norma was saved and became an ardent pro-life, anti-abortion activist, later converting to Catholicism, and received many honorarium speaking fees while she traveled the country as a pro-life activist. But shortly before her death, she recanted, claiming her conversion was an act, that she was paid for her activism. Now, what we can learn from this is Norma was just an ordinary person with very little education, trying to keep her head above water, who may have been overwhelmed by the notoriety swirling about her. When Roe v. Wade was being argued before the Supreme Court, the attorney representing Texas argued that personhood began at conception. The justices asked if abortion should always be legal, no matter how advanced the pregnancy. Jane Roe's attorney, Weddington, answered, "We do not ask the court to rule that abortion is good or desirable in any particular situation. We are here to advocate the decision as to whether or not a particular woman would continue to carry or will terminate a pregnancy is a decision that should be made by that individual." Thus, Weddington's argument was the extreme position that women should have the right to choose up until the time of birth whether or not to abort. And we have linked to the actual Roe v. Wade opinion itself, and we encourage you to read it for yourself. It's not hard to read, as long as you ignore the legal shrubbery. Blackmun was well aware how sensitive the abortion issue was to believers, and he says this, "We acknowledge our awareness of the sensitive and emotional issue of the abortion controversy, of the vigorous opposing views even among physicians, and of the deep and seemingly absolute conviction that the subject inspires. One's philosophy, one's experiences, one's exposure to the raw edges of human existence, one's religious training, one's attitudes towards life and family and their values, and the moral standards one establishes and seeks to observe are all likely to influence and color one's thinking and conclusions about abortion." And Blackmun resolves that our task, of course, is to resolve the issue by constitutional measurement, free of emotion and of predilection. And he is saying that as a legal principle, not a moral principle. Blackman reviewed the ancient and modern history of abortion. Although abortion and also exposure of unwanted infants to the wolves and wild animals was commonly practiced by many Greeks and Romans, abortion was expressly prohibited by the Hippocratic medical oath, and was also forbidden by both the Pythagoreans and the Christians. They both believed that life began at conception. However, many Stoics and rabbis believed that life begins at birth. Under common law, abortion was generally permitted before the quickening of the fetus through the middle of the 19th century. Due to the risks of abortion procedures, after this the intent of the laws forbidding abortions was to protect the health of the mother. Blackman notes that while modern medicine has made abortions performed by physicians as safe as childbirth itself, illegal abortion mills have a high mortality rate. The unborn is not considered a person under the 14th Amendment, and I again want to emphasize this is a statement of legal precedent. This was not meant by Blackman to be a moral statement. Many cases on abortion have been appealed to the Supreme Court in the decades following Roe v. Wade. The trimester distinctions are no longer in effect. States are permitted to enact regulations restricting abortion, as long as these regulations do not place an undue burden on the right to abortion as previously decided. So, now that we've discussed abortion, what are my personal beliefs about abortion? As Justice Blackman notes, abortion is an issue that blooms extreme positions by both pro-life and pro-choice advocates. Abortion is truly a moral tar baby. If you don't touch the tar baby and only glance at its outward appearances from about 20 feet away, you can yell and scream and shout and maybe even shoot at those who do the evil deed on Facebook and Twitter and on the abortion picket lines. But if you dare to ponder this moral tar baby called abortion, and then stick one arm and then another and then a leg and then another into the tar baby and educate yourself and ponder and pray about all the sticky morass of moral issues, you'll never get free of this moral tar baby. And it will also be harder to condemn and easier to feel and show compassion towards those unfortunate mothers who must make this awful decision, and then who must live with their decision. However, if any of my pro-choice friends invite me to participate in an abortion clinic picket line, I will politely find something else better to do. I think I'll pass, because I just do not enjoy tormenting people. And this is again the statement of my personal beliefs, and I agree 100% with Catholic teachings in the Catechism on abortion. I would just like to emphasize that pro-life concerns don't end at birth, and that personally I am pro-life and pro-compassion. And I'm compassionate towards everyone, the unborn, the born, the mothers, the doctors, the poor, the sick, the family, and the low-income workers. And yes, I have more pages. To get to my personal beliefs, there are basically three scenarios. The minority of cases, and that's less than 5%, and 5% is just somewhat of an arbitrary percentage. Only God knows the actual percentage, where the life of the mother and or the child is definitely in danger if no abortion is performed. And my personal belief is that doctors should be allowed to make professional judgments without any political or irrational interference, that this should be a joint choice between the doctor and the mother. And there's a large minority of cases where the life of the mother and or the child is probably in danger if no abortion is performed. My personal belief is that this should still be a joint choice between the doctor and the mother, without any political or irrational interference into what is really a medical decision. And if this trust is abused by a liberal doctor, well then, that is a matter between him and Jesus. And the overwhelming majority of cases where the mother simply wants an abortion and the health of the mother or the baby is not at stake, the Catechism clearly states that the state should be discouraged from enacting sweeping pro-choice legislation when there's minimal health issues involved. That is not debatable. Now, some states may legislate radical pro-choice initiatives, as Christians have lost influence politically. But nevertheless, Christians should always show compassion and encourage democracy. The problem of abolishing abortion in the cases when there's no medical issues involved has another three scenarios. Wealthy women will always be able to choose abortion. Just like it's always 5 o'clock somewhere, so there will always be somewhere where abortion is legal. And wealthy women will always fly there to abort at will. And we have the middle class and poor women who know that Dr. Google knows most everything, and they can ask Dr. Google how they can relatively safely self-abort. This was not true decades ago. But again, I emphasize, nobody should attempt an abortion on their own with no doctors around. And the middle class and poor women who are totally ignorant about Dr. Google, they will often endanger their lives with Lysol and coat hangers and other ugly efforts in attempts to abort. And when the mother's poor, perhaps black, and she lives in a Bible Belt state with a social safety net that's thin and shredded, this is highly hypocritical. In this scenario, I would be far friendlier to a pro-choice stance. The Lord would not favor anyone who would throw the first stone in this scenario. So furthermore, my personal beliefs are that I am morally distressed about a pro-choice position when there are minimal medical risks. And the Catechism states that the government should not permit a radical pro-choice position. But the reality is that there's room in our federal system for each state to choose a position on the issue of when to permit abortions. But as a Christian, I can say that these steps are morally defensible. We should encourage mothers to continue their pregnancies, but refrain from beating them over the head with our judgmental attitudes. In other words, we should let Jesus judge. We should be compassionate. The government can require that mothers be informed about the consequences of their action and be assured that it's their personal decision by mandating education, sponsoring support groups, and in general, slowing down the process when there's no medical issues. It's totally amazing that I never hear the suggestion in all the debates that go on about this issue. Everyone, especially the poor and disadvantaged, should be guaranteed medical and prenatal care, and Medicare should be expanded and integrated with Obamacare in all states, and especially those states that want to prohibit abortion. They should have a living minimum wage where they can afford to provide food, clothes, and shelter to their families, living with dignity. College should be made affordable once again, like it was when I was going through college. Students should not have to acquire massive debt to pay off college tuition. Nobody should be shut out of earning an education to improve themselves. And even when a democratic government permits a radical pro-choice policy, a true democracy is always preferable to a totalitarian regime under a dictator. And as a historical warning, if you're a single-issue voter, and abortion is that single issue, keep in mind that if you're a Frenchman in the 1930s and voted solely on the issue of abortion, you would have supported the policies of Vichy France. Vichy France was also rabidly pro-life and pro-Catholic, and Vichy France also collaborated with Hitler's Nazi regime and helped send many French Jews to their deaths in the concentration camps. Now, many Christians seem to believe, I hope they don't believe this, that Democrats are evil if they're pro-choice, and that our American democracy should be overthrown and replaced with a more totalitarian evangelical Christian regime that would guarantee that the government would adopt the right position on abortion, as can be seen by the tacit support of many white Christians of the attempted insurrection on January 6th. This was an issue that was addressed by the Second Vatican Council, which warned us, based on its European experience with fascism and democracy in World War II, that in the long run the Church is safer under a democracy, even when a secular democracy may not always support the moral positions of the Church. Even when, in the short run, a totalitarian fascist regime is friendly to the Church, it cannot be trusted, and it can turn on the Church at any time without any recourse. And this can be learned from studying the history of Mussolini and the Catholic Church, where he was first a friend with the Catholic Church until he fell under the spell of Hitler, and then the state started persecuting the Jews, just like in Germany. Now we'd like to discuss the sources we used for this video. If you wish to read some histories of abortion, Abortion Rights is the standard history, and Abortion in America are good choices. We didn't use them for this video because the opinion of Roe v. Wade offers such a succinct history that we did not need to consult these sources. Abortion in America basically used the same sources as the first book, but added additional Christian sources for a more balanced perspective. We learn in these books that the early history of abortion is difficult to summarize, since there are 50 state legal histories involved. And they documented the early acceptance in the first century of American history of the position that abortion was acceptable only before the quickening of the fetus. The book, Abortion in America, discussed the hypocritical position of many Christians several decades ago who wanted to deny abortion to young single mothers, but then persecuted and didn't support these fallen women and their children as a consequence of the poor moral choice of the mother. This is analogous to our modern hypocrisy where the Republican Bible Belt states who want to abolish abortion are also the states that offer the least amount of medical care, the lowest wages, and the fewest benefits to indigent mothers and their children. The Catholic Catechism is my primary source for this video, and you can also access it online on the Bishop's website. This book on the history of Roe v. Wade and the Roe v. Wade opinion itself are also excellent sources. And the Great Courses and Wondrium courses include many excellent lectures on the history of the major Supreme Court decisions. In this final section of my blog, I've sifted through some of the women's and doctors' personal stories on the internet. My intent is not to support any pro-life or pro-choice political arguments in this selection. There are stories on both sides. I did try to weed out the polemic and manufactured stories. My purpose is not to judge anyone about the correctness of their choices here. My purpose is to provoke compassion over these very difficult and heart-rending situations. In some stories, the women regretted their choices. In some stories, the women grieved their difficult choices. In some stories, the doctors tell us of the conundrums they face. And some stories you just may not like. But there's one fact common in all of these stories. They are all about real, live, breathing, sensitive human beings who have suffered much. People we know or will encounter who suffer through similar trials need to be treated with dignity and compassion. The YouTube description includes links to the video script in our blog. Please support our channel by sharing this video with your friends, and by clicking the like and subscribe buttons, and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. And please click on the links for interesting videos on other topics that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul. Thank you.